Good morning and welcome to another edition of Badass Marketing. I am joined, of course, by the ever so lovely Angela Duns. Angela, how are you this morning?
I'm doing really well. How about you, Mike?
I am good. I read something this morning where I'm not supposed to wish you a happy Memorial Day because that's inappropriate. So um, it's Memorial Day. Hope you're happy and hope I didn't put those two together. I don't know how to do that one. What was that?
And we remember that's what you're supposed to do on Memorial Day.
Okay, and we remember. So we remember all those who dedicated their lives, and we are going to move on and start this week's episode. What are we talking about this week?
My gosh, one of my favorite topics. We are talking about personal branding. And
Really?
when I do talks, and I did five last week, personal branding is one of those things that is people don't even they get uncomfortable in the conversation because they don't understand what it is. And of course, none of us doesn't want to have the answers. We want to have the answers. So I think this is a really good topic to sort of talk about what it is, what it isn't, and what it can do for you.
And why are most people uncomfortable around this topic?
People are, I work with attorneys, and attorneys are really comfortable talking about their company brand. They do not understand what a personal brand is. And I have a friend that I used to do enterprise sales training with, and I think he said it best. He said, "We don't do business with glass buildings.
Hmm.
We do business with people. It doesn't matter if you have a big enterprise brand behind you. It's your special something, something. It's that trust and relationship that we do business with. And that is personal brand."
And are folks uncomfortable because they don't understand it? Are they uncomfortable because we're taught from an early age not to brag? What is the discomfort coming from?
I think it comes from both. And frankly, from my own experience, I'll speak from that. If somebody asked me what my personal brand was, being an introvert, I would be like, I don't know. I think a lot of people haven't taken any time to explore what their personal brand is. And some of it may be that stigma, self promotion and braggadocious and whatever those things are that we've got running around in the back of our brain about that stuff. But it really is you. A lot of people talk about authenticity. And it's been so overused, people don't understand it. But if you're not being real with me, it's difficult for me to develop trust. And that is one of the biggest pieces of a personal brand is giving people a way to trust you and to really understand what problem you can solve for them.
So let's step back a second so that we don't go too far down the path. Let's start with the definition. How do you define uh, personal brand?
It's the way you show up and interact with others. Um, may be authentic, it may not be authentic, but it's your mannerisms, your personality, your ability to care and express yourself.
And is the personal brand you, or is the personal brand the persona that you put on for the business world?
Well, some definitions will say it's what you project out into the world.
So the
That
persona.
is,
Yeah.
yes. So it is somewhat different than reputation, which is something that you don't control. That is in the mind of the buyer or the prospect or client or whoever it might be, referral partner. But what you project out into the business world, that is your personal brand.
Because the only reason I ask is because a lot of times we will, know a quasi business celebrity, right? The Steve Jobs of the world. And he has projected a persona out there. And then we're always shocked and amazed when we read the sort of behind the scenes stories that, his personal, actions may not always be consistent. And I'm not suggesting Steve Jobs is that in this case, but I'm talking about sort of the scenario where we have this sort of public business persona, and then we get the behind the scenes stories where this person was difficult, this person was all kinds of things, which is contrary to the persona that we've come to know. So
Yes.
the personal branding is it not about creating a persona for marketing purposes, marketing yourself?
I would say yes. And I unfortunately don't always resonate with that behind the scenes 24/7.
And I mean, I guess the part where where there's the disconnect is where the authenticity is challenged, where, yes, they say that in public, but the reality is they don't hire, they're not hiring diverse, they're not doing this, they may say all the right things in public, but what they do in reality might be different. And that's where authenticity will come in. And if you feel there's a disconnect between what they say and how they act, then that will undermine the trust that you mentioned.
That is a brand killer.
Why do we need, branding on a personal level?
Well, I'm going to go back to the attorney example again. You know, if you have a strong enterprise brand behind you, for example, the Dwayne Morrises and Baker McKenzie's in the world, they have a really strong company brand. Now, if you bring in a really strong brand of your own, that is where the magic happens. People trust you, they trust the company behind you, and that's when you have a rainmaker. Somebody that just does a lot of business development, creates a reputation and a brand that's super strong, and they're the one that gets things done, brings in the business, shows up at the galas, that sort of thing. That is a really strong combination between personal and professional brand. So, but it's the personal piece that really amplifies the rest of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going to add to that in that um, in today's environment, we don't go work someplace for 30 years. So, right, which is different than, 20 or more years ago, where somebody sort of took a job and that company was their career, right? Or that was
Yes.
the expectation that that company would become their career. Now what we will see is, we have at will workers, we have people who, will move. Well, I think the latest statistic I read was something like, the average, person will have 10 to 12 different jobs over the course of their career. I think I've had that like in a year, but for the real normal people, that seems to be a good number. My number seems to be way higher. But so they need to promote themselves because they have new opportunities and they have to differentiate themselves from all the other candidates that are in the marketplace. So another important aspect, I think, of personal branding is part of just promoting yourself for the hiring process.
Yes. Yeah, that's a huge piece of it. Who gets the cherry assignments, the ones that really make your career? Who gets the speaking engagements? Who gets to do, the high profile stuff inside an organization? It's people who have a strong personal brand that represent the company well.
And how does one go about, creating and then ultimately developing this brand?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. There are extroverts and introverts in the world, and extroverts, I think, have a much easier time of projecting a strong personal brand. Introverts, it's kind of required that we do it much more intentionally, and it doesn't come natural. It goes against the grain for us. But it is just really deciding, you know, maybe public speaking isn't for you, but you can be a leader in other arenas. But it's picking a lane and really sticking with that, and volunteering yourselves for different assignments and things like that. But I'd love to talk about this a little bit more in the context of small business, because that is a jungle of competition these days. And I think personal brand for small businesses and solopreneurs, in that space, um, It's neglected on the part of the founders and owners so many times. And I think what I'd personally love to do, Mike, is to make it simple for them.
Yeah, I mean, I know what's interesting for us is, a lot of times we'll ask customers for testimonials or we'll get testimonials from clients, and they don't talk about the company. They talk about the individual that they work with. You know, he was great. She was very helpful. So again, that sort of echoes in your sentiments earlier, where we don't do businesses with, you know, businesses. We do business with individuals. So from the personal branding perspective, it really is about making that connection and, sort of creating the persona that identifies what you stand for. For me, I think that personal branding should be a conscious effort. For whatever reason, it seems to be passive. People just sort of fall into whatever they fall into. But we spend a considerable amount of time developing brands and branding strategies for the company and the messaging for the company. And then, when we default down to personal branding, we just kind of let it happen. Whereas, we will work with clients, especially when they're looking to, become thought leaders with like, okay, here is your messaging. What's interesting is we do a fair amount of activity with some local politicians. And it's like, oh my God, he's on a talking point. Like they have their messaging, they have the points that they want to convey, they have the talking points that they want to be known for. So, like I said, we just happen to be working with a local candidate, and I listen to a lot of what he's doing because obviously we're giving him feedback. But I'm always like, oh, he's on this talking point. You know what I mean? Like, so he has his message. His message is very much constructed to convey certain points. And I know him as an individual, and I know him as the politician, and there is definitely some authenticity between, like his own personal beliefs did form a lot of that messaging. But I also know when he's on, when he's in politician mode and, in talking points. So, I think that politicians are a very good example of creating this personal, branding strategy. And what are your talking points? What is it that you want to be known for? What is it that, you need to convey for people to want to connect with you? So, one of the things that I'm going to suggest is, work with someone like Angela, where it's not passive, where you create this personal brand, you create the messaging so that when someone says, hey, what do you do? You're like, I work with websites. Like, what does that even mean? I love my value proposition.
Yes,
So from a personal branding perspective, what's your value proposition? Right? And
exactly.
actually go through the exercise of building a brand about you. It's the same way that we would build a brand for a new product or build a brand for a new company, where we go through, what's the unmet need? How do you differentiate? What is the value that your clients receive? But we do this on a personal level. And then we begin to sort of have you create this brand persona that is you.
And you touched on a couple of really important points, and there's one that I really want to bring to the forefront. You talked about values and beliefs. Now, if there's anything that helps you identify with your prospects and create trust and commonality, it is your values and beliefs. And of course, a brand can stand for something as well. But I think it's a little bit stronger when individuals really express what you stand for. If you're a generic person and you don't really stand for much, it's really hard for people to identify with you and to feel that commonality. But if you really stand for something, um, whether it resonates with me or not, I know who you are. And that is a great piece of authenticity.
I mean, for most of our clients, again, like these become tropes because we keep going back to the same things, but we also go back to the five whys, because we're like, well, what do you do? And they're like, well, I'm a baker. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't tell me anything. There's lots of bakers, right? Why are you a baker? Well, this and that. And you keep pushing to get to sort of like what drove you to want to do what you do. Because that and hopefully your values will come out through that. Hopefully, some of your interests and likes, oh, I really like baking, I really like this and that. So a lot of it when we're creating this personal brand, we do the same thing that we would for a business brand, and we go through that sort of five whys. Why are you doing this? What's driving you? To get to the underlying, core of, what's motivating you to be the baker this week.
Right. Well, and I love your politician example because that's, you know, you can see when a politician goes into politician mode. He
Oh,
is
absolutely. Yeah.
very consciously projecting a very specific persona and message. And I really want small businesses to be much more aware. Let's talk about a small restaurant owner who, it's a passion project. It's a family thing. Now, other people can tell you what their brand is fairly easily. They can tell you why they love to go to this mom and pop restaurant, but I think that business owners should become much more conscious so that they can project it in a more intentional way.
Sorry, I thought I had to sneeze. I was trying to be.
Allude.
That was a distractor. I'm sorry. Absolutely. Just, creating, especially for small businesses, so that they can, differentiate, because every one of us has competitors, and if you don't have a competitor, you're either in the wrong space, because if there's no competitors, that should tell you something, or, you are just so unique and fabulous that you need to get the messaging out there. So, whatever camp you fall into, obviously, we want to get into this idea of personal branding.
Right. And the differentiation is super important, I think, you
And
know.
I also want to sort of just clarify that we've used value, I think, in two contexts here, just to sort of separate them. There's your underlying values of what you believe in, and then there's the values of what you provide your client, where, what is the benefits that they're willing to pay for. So just to clarify, you're going to hear us talk about values, and it may be confusing because we're talking about one or the other. I'm sure the context will help, but when we talk about value, it could be either or.
Right. Exactly. That's a great point, Mike.
Yeah. So where do we begin when we're first working with somebody, or we're talking to somebody who's not been through this process? Where do you begin with them?
Um, well, I think really understanding who their ideal client is a pretty easy place to start. If they think about who is their favorite client, their favorite person to work with, they could work with them all day long. There's a resonance, there's an understanding, they have similar values, that sort of thing. If they can really identify with that dream client, it's much easier for me to start to tease out, well, what are the elements of that? you know it,
I'm
and
laughing
it
because my favorite clients are the ones that don't bother me. So I don't know what that says about me. Like,
and every business model is different.
right.
But I work very intimately with my clients, so having that kind of a relationship and a rapport really helps the whole process. The more they can trust me, the more I can pull their personal brand out of them and mirror it back to them so that they can really see what their extra something something is that differentiates them from the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting for us is we have, what happens with us is when we, get their trust, then they know they don't have, this is like something we can take off their plate. So like, again, for them, the ideal situation is they don't have to talk to me, because they're trusting that, if it's in our hands, it'll get done the way it should be done. So,
Right.
but
And you
I'm
have
just
a very
laughing because
different
our favorite customers are the ones that, trust us enough to let us do what we do.
Well, and it's so interesting that you say that too, because I mean, you've already established what their brand voice is, and that's why they trust you, is
Yeah,
because
I mean, what's interesting is
you're never going to sway from that. You are going to be their brand voice.
what's interesting is very often we will post on behalf of the CEO, in the brand voice, so that because we don't want the CEO posting about cat butts because I had to go back to the cat butts after last week. but that's off message. So rather than trying to figure out what's on message and what's off message, they just they outsource that to us so that we become their personal brand by figuring out what the messaging is, figuring out what they should be saying, and then making sure that it's conveyed on various platforms. But we'll actually post on their behalf um, to grow their personal brand.
Well, and this is an excellent point. This is where all of it has to sort of be consistent and cross over very strategically and intentionally. But people ask me all the time about personal stuff. How do you
Mhm.
post personal things? Well, it's easy to post personal things if you keep it on brand.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the question is like, okay, if you want to post something personal, how is that relevant to your brand message? If there's an underlying context or there's something that it shows that you're a nice person and that you're friendly and that's part of your brand positioning, fine. If it has no relevance to your personal brand as a personal brand, then we're like it's a distraction.
Right. And it takes people anything that confuses, anything that causes that cognitive dissonance, that is definitely not something that you want. So, you want to have some core values, the personal values, the brand values, um, and some things that you are providing as a client that's valuable to the client. If you stick within that lane, you're going to be okay.
And so are you advocating to niche down?
I am. It
Okay.
has certainly worked for me. Can I serve people that are outside of my super narrow lane? Yes, of course I can, but I get to
Mm.
choose to. And that makes all the difference for me. But, the more I niche, the more I focus on just attorneys, the easier it is for me because they come to me and they say, "Oh, you're an expert with attorneys. You're the one we want to talk to. You're the one we want to work with." So
And so do you begin with a formalized process of, you know, defining that personal brand?
I don't think I've really done that in a formal way yet, but
Mhm.
if somebody were to ask me, I would definitely be able to tell them what my brand is. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I just went through a rebranding. And there are a lot of similarities between the two brands. I mean, definitely adventurous. Um, I would love to think of myself as being a thought leader in my space. I'm not afraid to make bold statements about things. And I think people can identify that with when you make a bold statement, people are either attracted to it or they're repelled by it or they're neutral. And so that becomes kind of like a sorting hat for your brand. You attract the people that are going to be easier to work with because they really get you and they understand your brand. So getting to that point of trust where they just let you do things and they trust you to do it well, it's a quicker journey.
And we I guess the question that comes to mind is we tend to gravitate towards things like us, right?
Yes.
So how important is it to sort of find that connection between you and your client in your personal brand?
I think it's pretty important. You have to People who don't stand for anything are suspicious. It's really hard to get into those conversations because you're always kind of waiting for them to give you something that you can latch onto, a belief, a value, a situation, some sort of commonality. If you don't have that, it's really hard to establish that whole know, like, and trust thing. But if you make some bold statements and people are like, oh, I get it now. I understand who this person is. I trust them. They're going to do a good job for me. So,
And how do you separate the personal brand from the personality? Because a lot of times you may encounter a big personality that you may or may not resonate with, and you've never even listened to what their personal brand's about, but it's just the personality is so big that, it either stops you in your tracks or, you're drawn to it, I guess. How do we as individuals, especially when we're trying to build this personal brand, deal with the personality, whether it's good or bad?
well, and that's where it gets super tricky. I mean, I spent 10 years as a teacher, and I learned very quickly that you have to be neutral about a lot of things. You can be passionate about it in your personal life, but when you're talking with people, you have to take a neutral stance on lots of things. And so I think that is a piece of personal branding. You don't go down a couple of rabbit holes. And I have definitely been I have fallen into that trap of a strong personality. They sound
Not
so
me, never.
confident.
I have never.
They sound so confident, and you 100% believe what they say. And then I hired a coach, a business development coach, and she was the most useless coach ever. She harmed my business development more than she helped it. But she was one of those people that was super confident and absolutely right about almost everything, and could not. You have to set your own personal brand aside to help other people find theirs and really drop into what are they saying in between the lines. That's where a lot of personal branding lies. And so just having a strong personality doesn't mean you have a strong brand. It's a strong personality. And that doesn't mean that you can deliver what you just told me you could deliver to me. What is really needed is somebody who can listen as well as project.
Yeah, I mean, I know one of the interesting things in my career has always been it's not what you said, it's how you said it. You know what I mean? Where the
That's
messaging seems to
awesome.
have gotten lost in the personality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to sometimes you have to tone it down the personality side, so that it doesn't overshadow the personal branding aspects of it.
Yes. So being overconfident doesn't mean that you're trustworthy. So,
Right.
sort of toning down the way we tune into people who are super confident and really look for, can I trust this person? What is the body language? What is the track record?
And how do we counter sort of first impressions? Because we're talking about like developing a messaging and talk about very conscious wording and all that kind of thing. And yet many of us, our first introductions, maybe it's a Zoom call, maybe it's a breakout session, but within the first 3 seconds, they're like, oh no, this person's, this ain't gonna happen. And they haven't expressed their personal branding. It's just that sort of initial impression for whatever reason wasn't positive. How do we deal with that? Because I can tell you I have a bunch of people that initially I don't think I was all that enamored with, but turned out to be either good business partners. Sort of had to get past that initial hurdle of that first impression if it didn't go well.
And that is such a great point. Such a great point. Sometimes it is those people that we start out with a problematic relationship that end up being some of our best friends, best clients, best referral partners, whatever it might be. Um, you know, I I am not the biggest fan of in-person networking, and I know for a fact that I'm awkward. Sometimes I don't project my personal brand well. And there's a lot of other people that fall into that category too. I remember one of the first people I met when I started networking was a dentist named Mike. and and it became a
Yeah, I don't do
joke.
teeth. That's not me.
He was one of the worst networkers besides me that I've ever met in my entire life. Just, the first guy to shove a business card in your hand, whether you need a dentist or not, and
Mm,
just seemed desperate. And I mean, that was his whole persona. Ends up, he's a brilliant dentist and, has come up with a couple of patents and that sort of thing, but just isn't a personable guy. Now, we come into branding as a whole human being and, faults and all.
right.
And so sometimes we have to look past our initial impressions. Now, sometimes first impressions are dead on, but we are human beings, and it's kind of hard to be on brand 24/7. So I think there is a little bit of leeway and forgiveness that we should be able to give people about personal branding. It's the consistency over time that
I mean,
matters.
one of the tools that we use consistently when we're working with clients is we actually videotape them. And we'll play the videotape back, and I'm like, this is it. This is how you present. And a lot of people it's like hearing your voice on a tape recorder for the first time. You're like, how do I come across that way? Like that's not what it sounds like in my head. And I'm sure that when many of us present,
Oh
um,
my God.
we think we're doing a great job, and then because we work with a lot of startups in pitch coaching, and they give their pitch, and we show them the video, and they're like, we tried to tell you. But and as long as they're open to feedback and watching the video, then they usually genuinely improve. But giving them that, like it's not our word. We don't say a word, like here's the video, you watch it, you figure it out. But just giving them that, letting them see themselves so that they get a sense of that, and they get a sense of how they present, can be very eye-opening for them.
Well, and I do think that at the beginning, if it's uncomfortable for you to express your personal brand, it is going to take some time and some practice. And the way you feel it and hear it and see it in your head is very different to the way people receive what you have to say and who you are. And I think you can't create a personal brand in a vacuum. There has to be ongoing feedback and a loop of that informs your personal brand. As the marketplace heats up, as situations change, as technology changes, who is your brand today?
But there's, like, don't underestimate the value of practice, right? Because especially like when we're working with folks with a pitch coach, we're just like, do it again, like, because the more times you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get with it. You're going to, maybe in the beginning you can't remember one or two key points, and we have to sort of point that out and say, oh, you need to work this back in. But there's a practice aspect to it where to get on message and to sort of get, so that it's almost automatic, that's going to come from practice and time.
Right. And there's a certain objectivity that you have to hold in the back of your mind as well. Is this flowing? Is my message making sense? Am I moving from one point to another? And, I just read an article on writing the other day, and she said, get it all out of your system, write it down, and then axe three-fourths of it. We are too close. I mean, we can't see the forest for the trees. We're too close to what we do, and we're very passionate about it in many cases. And that doesn't mean that what we're saying is clear to someone else. And I think less information is much more, rather than just regurgitating everything on somebody about what it is that we do and being super passionate about it and speaking fast. Just saying one or two things And especially if you're in a pitch mode, if you repeat certain things and it kind of becomes a theme throughout, it becomes much easier to understand what it is that you're talking about rather than randomly floating around from point to point.
I mean, one of the things that I like to do, I'll say I like to do is, I never want to sort of lead the pitch. What I want to do is I want to engage with somebody, try to understand from them what their needs are. And then if we have a solution or if we have something that we can offer back, we can then present it tailored back to what their need was. So,
Yes.
rather than like, oh, we can get you more business, what they'll say is, oh, I can't, I have a hard time reaching out to this group of people. And like, okay, here's what we think would work there. So one of the things that works for us is we tend to tailor our messaging based on the need that they've identified, so that we're just not generically pushing that business card in their hand saying buy from us, buy from us. We're waiting to hear what their need is and then giving them a response that addresses their specific need. If you hang around with us, you may realize that what we just pitched back to them, we pitched back to 4 other people because that is part of our branding. But in the moment, what they hear is we identified, what their need was. We heard what their need was, which you talked about listening, and then we gave them a solution that was relative to them and relevant to them. So for us, like when it comes to personal branding, I like to hear what their need is so that I can respond to them versus just like, here's what we sell. Here's my business card. You need to buy from me.
Right, exactly. And that's such an important point. I would say that probably 3 out of the last 5 clients that came to me are going through a rebrand. The market has shifted, what they offer has shifted, who they serve has become much more specific, or maybe they have a new offering that is in a slightly adjacent market. But really understanding who they are in this iteration and what it is that they're offering and what are the needs, wants, and desires of that target audience.
So when we talk about personal branding, there's, this idea of know, like, and trust keeps coming back up because you and I are networkers, and that's the mantra for networking, right? Know, like, and trust. So walk us through know, like, and trust as it relates to personal branding.
Well, personal brand is going to have to show up in every single piece of that. And the more intentional it is, the easier it is for people to walk through the whole know, like, and trust cycle. So you meet somebody for the very first time and you give them your 30-second pitch. Is it clear who you serve and what problem you solve? That's the know. It's not only is it a know you personally, recognize you by face the next time they see you. Oh, that's Mike. And Mike does content for websites that really attracts the right type of client. Now that's no. So there's 2 pieces to that. They need to know you personally and have some sort of affinity for you. And they need to know what it is that you do. Now, if somebody talks to me and they give me a laundry list of what they do, I have no idea what they do. I have no idea. And I may not be very inclined to remember who they are because all I'm going to remember is, oh my gosh, that was the most confusing message. And I want to move as far away from that as possible. So the know part is super important. Now, like goes a lot more into, you know, do my personal values, beliefs, the way I do business, the way I spend my leisure time, does it resonate with you? Do we have something in common that I can really cue into? Oh, that person, it stands for this one thing that I'm really passionate about also. Or, oh, they think about business the same way I do. The personalization is really important to them. Putting together a boutique solution that's designed just for them really resonates with them. And then that helps grease the wheels towards trust. Trust is, I've kind of checked out the market, and this is the person that I think can deliver to me what I actually need. And the trust also sometimes has an assumption. I may not know exactly what it is that I need, but this person can get me there. I trust them enough to put myself into their hands and let them help me figure this out in a way that's unique to me.
I mean, I always sort of envision know, like, and trust as funnel marketing, right? Because, at the top of the funnel is no. And you have to show up, be there, show up numerous times. They have to see you, oh, you're a regular, or, this is the third meeting I've run into you. So, they know you. You said, like, that's Mike. They know who that is, right? They may or may not have formed an opinion, but this is somebody that's been in front of them. We talk from a marketing perspective. You have, numerous touch points before someone knows you. So part of the top of the funnel is the know, right? Then they need to spend time with you, which is sort of mid funnel, where you do show up at numerous meetings, or you do sort of reach out and do omni-channel marketing, whatever it is. And they get to understand sort of what you do, how you do it. They may hear testimonials from other people, or maybe word of mouth referral, which helps the like. And then based on either the work that you've done or who the referral came from, you've demonstrated that you have the abilities or the capabilities, and then that sort of, pushes you down to the bottom of the funnel where they're in the decision making part of it, and that's where trust would come in. So for me, know, like, and trust is a funnel marketing exercise.
It's perfect analogy. It's perfect.
So, really sort of beginning with, and from a brand strategy, we create a brand because we're trying to create awareness. So the first aspect of the awareness is the know part and just showing up. And you mean, some folks are comfortable in person. You indicated you're not, so you prefer another channel. But, understanding where they are, because they're not going to likely, all your clients aren't going to be in one place. Some of them may like to show up in person. Some of them may, prefer just to get information from a word of mouth referral. So you need to find numerous different places, to reach out to them.
Right.
And then, convey some of your values, or, 10% of our businesses go toward supporting, these causes. That helps generate a like, because if they align with those causes. The other nice thing is, if they don't like what you stand for, that's not a bad thing, because that clearly conveys that you probably won't get along,
Right.
or you're probably not a good fix. So, if they support a particular political candidate or something like that, you're like, yeah, I don't need to do business with them. They're of a different mindset, and it's a filter, right? So it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. And, we choose to, I would prefer to work with clients that like me and I like them than, struggling with, somebody that ideologically I don't concur with. So, and I think trust is the ultimate. And, the only way you garner trust is to show up, deliver, and do it again.
Right. Right. And consistently throughout that entire funnel, the awareness, be consistent there, be very consistent with what your personal brand is and what you deliver all the way through that funnel. That's super important.
And what's interesting too is, we will engage with a lot of folks, especially through networking, and it's just so interesting how personality can dominate that. And, you have to be sensitive and aware of that, because there's some perfectly lovely people out there that I'm sure do absolutely great work, but you have to get past their personality.
Yes. And, that thing that you said about it being a filter is
Mm.
super important to me. The 80-20 rule. It's 20% of your clients take up 80% of your time. And I would prefer not to have those situations. I learned very early on in my business that if things were really kind of a struggle in the initial consultation and that sort of thing, probably not somebody that I need to take on at all for whatever reason. I mean, maybe they're not being extremely upfront about what their beliefs and their values are, but I just know from body language or whatever that they're not a good fit. And I'm very inclined not to take those clients. And it is a good thing for your brand and for your business to say no when it's necessary.
And how closely does your personal brand have to be to the business's brand?
I think it has to be close enough that the authenticity is just obvious.
Hmm.
Or being congruent with the words that you are projecting.
Yeah, because if the company is saying one thing and then your personal brand does something completely different, there'll be that disconnect, right? So it makes you wonder.
Houston, we
Yeah,
have a problem.
we have a problem. Um, so you know, how do we create awareness once we've established this personal brand?
Well, it's being consistent. Whatever your messaging is, whatever your values are, whatever your value proposition are for your ideal clients, you just want to be super consistent and aware of that. So every time you show up, whether it's on social media or at a networking event, or even when you're designing a business card, or print materials, if that's where you're going these days, you just want all of that to be consistent. You don't change the message just because it's a different platform. And because you're at such and such a networking event, you don't change the message because it's a different audience. You have to keep it all consistent. Now, maybe the people that are in front of you are not your ideal audience, but they know someone who is. So you don't change, you just keep things consistent all the way through. And I think that helps establish the trust.
And excuse me, what undermines a personal brand?
Inconsistency. Um, some people, creative people specifically, um, come up with different messaging every day, shiny new object. And I am very subjected to this, you know, but really staying the course. What you
For,
are projecting needs to be solid and consistent.
for me, there's other aspects that will undermine a personal brand. And for me, like these are just basic courtesies. I get very frustrated with folks that can't show up on time, right?
I'm a Midwesterner. If you're going to
I'm a New
show up
Yorker,
late,
so we have no patience at all, right? So, but for me, that's another aspect of personal branding, respecting other people's time and showing up. If we have a meeting at 9, you show up at 9. I have a client who routinely shows up 15 to 30 minutes late to every meeting. Okay. By the time the client gets on the phone, I'm in a bad mood because, and they're paying me. So it's like, all right, I got to put up with this to some degree, um, it's just part of that person's personal branding that, as a recipient of that, it undermines his branding because it's like, clearly he, feels his time is more important than mine,
yeah. Well, another
so
killer for me is someone who doesn't listen. That is definitely a brand killer for me. If you can't listen to me, how can you help me?
and that I think aligns with the folks that are just in sales mode, pushing, whether either physically or just, mentally pushing that business card in your hand, regardless of whether or not you wanted to receive it. They, they are just out, doing a numbers game. If I have to get 100 no's to get a yes. So they're just, which is what we're taught early on in sales. Like, don't take no's not an answer. That, how do you counteract, the no's? I would rather not counteract a no. I would rather sort of find an alignment that we can discuss than try to overcome a no.
I think some of the old-fashioned sales models are damaging. They're just damaging.
I mean,
It's
they're a
really
different mindset, and for like I can appreciate that mindset in like a D2C play where you just need to touch volume because statistically, if you hit enough people and enough people, if for example, we're selling aluminum siding, right? If I call 1,000 people, there's a chance that 10 may actually need aluminum, but I can't figure out which 10 it is unless I call 1,000. So that's a numbers game that we do in sales, but it's not something like I think there's a big difference between sales and marketing, and I think this branding aspect is a marketing aspect. So it's part of sales, but it's also more of a marketing exercise.
right. Right, exactly. And it all comes back to communication. I mean, I think everything that we've talked about so far all comes back to some form of communication. Are you communicating your personal brand in a way that's being understood in the marketplace?
So know, like, and trust. This concept of first they have to understand who you are, what you do, what you represent. Hopefully they align with that and they hang out for a while and that develops the like. And then your actions and your follow-up will ultimately develop trust. What are we talking about next time? Where we're going next time?
Well, I have an idea. Um,
Okay.
how do you give a good testimonial, Mike?
Okay.
That's on my mind, and I think that's really important for small business owners to help to get great testimonials, but also to direct the process so they get the very best kind that actually help move business forward. So, what makes a good testimonial?
Well, that'll be our topic for next week. We appreciate you joining us. And as always, you can find us on the web. We recently launched a new Facebook page. Is that correct?
LinkedIn page.
LinkedIn page. Sorry, LinkedIn. Oh my goodness.
And every
LinkedIn
single
page.
episode is there.
Okay. So if you're interested in what we're doing, find Badass Marketing on LinkedIn, not Facebook. Uh, on LinkedIn, follow along. If you have thoughts, please provide us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And we look forward to talking to you next week because we will be talking about how to give the perfect testimonial. Angela, have a great week.
And you as well.
Thank
Happy
you.
Memorial Day
Oh,
or a
yeah.
great Memorial Day.
Something, right? Exactly. Whatever the politically correct is for that. I don't even know what it is. So you too, whatever it is, have it. Bye.
Bye.